Hi, my name's Kyle Chow. I've kept nearly all my thoughts bottled up inside myself for a very long time, and because I'm usually too scared to talk about this stuff in person, I put all my energy this past month into conveying my thoughts through this video. I'm tired of feeling held back and speaking out about myself, since all my life I've been afraid of saying something someone else doesn't like. So everything I say here is my true and honest thoughts. Anyway, I guess this may resemble one of those draw my life videos, but that isn't really my primary aim here because A, I'm only 21 years old, B, I'm really bad at drawing, like for example that thing on the screen to the left is supposed to be me as a baby, but this just seemed like a suitable medium for what I wanted to do, and C, my main goal is to tell a story from a perspective that I feel people don't really hear about too often, which I feel is primarily relevant to my experiences in the past year rather than my whole life. Originally, I included a small segment about my childhood as well, but in retrospect it isn't too related to the rest of the video, so I cut it out since this video is already ginormous enough already. If you still do want to watch it though, I uploaded it as a separate 5-minute video, and you can watch it now before watching the rest of the video. But if not, let's begin by starting with when I graduated high school and entered college at Rice. So upon graduating high school, I realized that up until this point in my life, I had been mostly just blindly following what my parents told me to do, and I never really made my own decisions. So I was really motivated to become a different person in college. I started by quitting activities that I had only been doing because my parents had told me to, like swimming and playing clarinet. But then I realized I didn't know what I myself even liked, due to me just always following what other people told me to do without thinking for myself. So I didn't really have a strong sense of identity or where to start looking for a community. I also realized how socially awkward I was. Up until now, I mostly had friends I'd known for many years, but now that we were all going our separate ways and I tried to talk to new people, I wasn't able to hold good conversations. One of my friends told me that she thought it was weird that I looked at the floor while conversing rather than making eye contact, and this was my first time hearing that. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that, along with a combination of lack of other social cues and back-channel responses, contributed to me being a generally awkward person during conversations. On top of that, I started to become cognizant of, the fact that I was Asian. Going to Rice and seeing so many more people of color made me realize that I had never really thought about my own race. The town I had grown up in was 90% white in 2000, and while that percentage has definitely decreased in recent years, white people were still the vast majority. So I realized that in response to having grown up in this environment, I had sort of adapted my thought process to as if I was a white person myself, if that makes any sense, looking at non-white people as different than me. I'd even come to hold racist beliefs against Asians due to the comments that my parents made about FOBs and stupid Chinese, despite their own parents having been those immigrants that they were insulting. But clearly I wasn't white, and while pretending to be white had worked all this time, I couldn't keep a mindset that was different than from who I was born as. Yet when I looked back at my life, I hadn't really adopted any sort of Asian culture at all. Both me and my parents were born and raised in America, so any sort of Chinese culture had pretty much been lost along the way. I didn't know the language, I didn't know any of the customs, I didn't particularly like the food. I realized I'd basically neglected all the Asian side of myself my whole life, but I wasn't white either, so where did I belong? And this is what I went to Rice with in the back of my mind. At first, things went pretty favorably. I adjusted to college life relatively smoothly. Physically, I realized I hadn't been exercising at all since I quit swimming, so what I did was begin playing this game called Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR for short. I already had been exposed to it when I was really young when my parents bought the game for the PlayStation 2 for me and my sister, but it'd been years since I'd played it. I remember it being very good exercise, so I began doing it again in 2 different ways. The first was I found an arcade kind of near Rice that I went to around once a week, and the second was I would literally watch videos of it online and sit there in my room ghost-stepping it on the concrete floor, much to the dismay of people living in the rooms next to me, as I found out later. But yeah, that was my exercise. Emotionally, I was able to find a couple friends to hang out with on a semi-regular basis, and I tried going to a couple parties and even drinking. But while fun, I still found that I couldn't really put myself out there too much despite all the hope I had gotten from my actions senior year. Dancing in front of others was something I just couldn't bring myself to do, and even though I was surrounded by people, I never got to know anyone I hadn't already met. Academically, I was still really into math and science like I had been in high school, but I kind of began having this growing inkling that I was somehow different from these people sitting around me in my class. I was planning to be a physics major, but all the other physics people were just so interested in the current physics research and seemed to have a wider interest in the subject that I lacked. Like, I just wanted to solve the problems. And I realized I'd felt this a tiny bit back in high school too, this sense of not truly belonging with the nerds. I ended up switching to a chemistry major early sophomore year since learning physics stopped being fun, and doing chemistry problems was more appealing to me. Extracurricular-wise, I began my search for a community. That previous summer before coming to Rice, I had visited Malaysia since my sister was teaching English there, so I got to meet a lot of her students and they introduced me to Islam. It was fascinating to learn about, but more than that, I could just feel the sense of community that united them due to their faith. So coming to Rice, I joined the Rice Muslim Student Association, or MSA. I didn't have any intent to convert, but I wanted to see if I could feel that same sense of community I'd felt from the students I visited in Malaysia. And it did end up being fun to attend meetings and learn more, but I never truly was able to connect with anyone on a deeper level. But I still thought religion in general was interesting. So sophomore year, I joined the Banyuk Council, which was a club dedicated to interfaith awareness, thinking I had another chance there. But I still couldn't. I felt too awkward around the other people, and despite me being on a board of a club about religion, I was still incapable of holding conversations about religion with other people. I think what really started a major change in my life was my discovery of J-pop the summer after freshman year. I had my first exposure through this Japanese artist named Kyary Pamyu Pamyu, and while looking back now, it was pretty embarrassing. Her music made me really happy at the time, and so I enrolled in Japanese with an interest in learning more about the culture. And what I found in Japanese was just amazing. I started from the ground up, first learning the alphabets, then basic kanji and vocab, then basic grammar, and everything just kept building on itself so nicely, and it felt so good to see the gradual progress I was making. Slowly, I began to understand more of the Japanese text I would see scrolling through Japanese tweets on Twitter. In listening to Japanese songs, I began picking up more and more phrases and eventually entire sentences when I had initially not understood a single word. It was like discovering an entire other world bit by bit through another language. At the same time, I also realized that through my study of Japanese, I could learn to embrace more of the Asian side of my identity I'd neglected my entire life. So this added to my newfound passion and brought out a much more eager side of me. Normally, approaching new people and starting conversations was something I was deathly afraid of, but with Japanese I found myself constantly trying to talk to new people and make new friends because I was excited to discover more about my identity and more about this amazing world I'd stumbled upon. On top of all that, it dawned on me that this was probably the first time in my life that I'd found something myself that I enjoyed. All those other things earlier in life, like math team, swimming, clarinet, at their core, they were all just things that my parents had decided. But Japanese was something I'd found all by myself, and it felt like it was truly my interest, and I was studying it because I wanted to, and not for any other reason. So that small suspicion I had about me being different than everyone else in my STEM classes, it grew. I started to shift my passion and love away from chem classes and into studying Japanese. I began watching Japanese dramas. I downloaded a kanji learning app and quickly found myself getting into the habit of spending every single spare moment of the day using it. No matter what, I wanted to do those kanji app reviews, to the extent that when I was at a formal dinner meeting, I'd pretend I needed to go to the bathroom just so I could have an excuse to go into the stall and review kanji on that app. So, in order to pursue this passion farther, I applied and was accepted to a 6-week study abroad language immersion program run by Rice called Rice in Japan for the summer after my sophomore year. I was excited to finally be able to go to Japan, immerse myself, and form new best friends in Japanese. So I finished up the school year and went on the trip in Yes, I learned a lot more of the language and got to experience life in Japan. But this is where things started taking an enormous turn. During that trip, something just changed inside of me. For reasons I still don't really know, I suddenly began feeling this extremely heightened need for connection. As in, I badly needed a best friend that I could talk to every day, and more importantly, I needed someone I could truly be myself around. The end of the program approached, and while I had a lot of fun improving my Japanese, I realized I hadn't made these connections I'd wanted to. There were language partners at the university our class took place at, who the program people encouraged us to meet with, but most of the time when I asked, they would just say they were busy and couldn't hang out. I thought it might have just been the same for everyone in the program, but I was hearing how other people had, for example, gone drinking at a bar or did karaoke late into the night with their partners, and it made me feel really bad that I wasn't able to do the same. And along with the inexplicable heightened need for emotional connection, I also started feeling an inexplicable higher need for physical connection too. I definitely already had a sex drive since early in high school, but that summer it heightened to just this unimaginable extent. I'd simply just be walking on the street and probably 80% of the girls I saw that looked between 15 and 25 years old, I'd see their faces and become overwhelmed with emotion and drive. I don't know, it might have just been that I went through puberty extremely late and this was the final phase or something like that. But as I was traveling around Japan by myself after the program, this increased physical need along with the increased emotional need made me feel a mix of confused and lonely and sad. But after coming back to the US, I returned to normal for the most part, and my need for a connection subsided a little. I had some pretty bad jet lag, but after waking up at 4 a.m. for a week straight, I realized that early morning here in America was evening in Japan, so I looked up a site that I could watch Japanese TV on. And so for the rest of the summer, I spent my days discovering all these amazing different Japanese TV programs, and I ended up keeping that sleep schedule of waking up early and going to bed early each day into the school year. But as the fall semester began, I felt that need for physical and emotional connection creep up on me again, so I was like, this is the year I need to enter the romantic world. Up until this point, I hadn't really felt any strong particular need for a relationship and had never given it much thought, so it was like this last big unknown in the world. So I entered the year with high hopes for figuring out dating and also just figuring out how to make new connections in general. My entire life I had simply worn shorts and t-shirts every day since I hated dressing up, but I decided to make some small attempts to change that, like wearing long pants more often, buying a few new polo shirts, buying a new pair of shoes I'd wear a couple times a week. It was nothing too profound, but for me at the time that was a huge step. Then when classes actually got started though, and I wanted to enter the dating world, I realized, well, where am I even supposed to start? How am I supposed to meet new people? So I tried downloading Bumble, a dating app, but I was just kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing and felt very self-conscious at first, I guess. So I swiped right on a few people, but I didn't get any matches. I temporarily gave up and I turned my attention to just forming any connections in general, not necessarily even romantic ones. I tried joining the Rice Asian Pacific American Student Alliance, or Rice APAZA for short, as their secretary since I figured I cared about finding out more about my Asian identity. But I found myself always just unable to make good conversation with how socially incapable and awkward I was. Everyone else on the board seemed a lot more knowledgeable about the issues than me, and I felt I couldn't really contribute anything. I wasn't able to feel any sort of connection, and since they all already seemed to have their own friend groups, I just felt like these people don't want to add some awkward guy to their lives. As for my classes, they generally really didn't facilitate group work too much, so I didn't have many chances to meet people there. What I tried instead was simply sitting down at random tables with people I didn't know at meals, despite the enormous amount of awkwardness and nervousness I felt. But I would say most of the time that failed. Even the couple of times I did manage to get some sort of conversation going, it ended up being impossible to maintain any sort of meaningful connection with any of these people I met, since I didn't share any classes with them and thus had no reason to regularly see them. And since everybody's always so busy, Unless there's a very strong mutual interest on both sides to develop a connection, it will just never amount to anything significant. So that's what ended up happening. And it made me feel awful, like I was trying these things and wasn't getting any results. So I started falling deeper and deeper into loneliness, and my heightened need for physical and emotional connection that I had first felt in the summer, that began to grow stronger and stronger, which made it all the more painful every day when I lacked those connections. I think somewhere around September, the thought struck me for the first time. That was that I wouldn't actually mind if I died, because I didn't feel any close connections to anyone, and thus I reasoned nobody's daily life would even be affected if I suddenly just died one day. And so this thought process began to take hold in my mind over the next couple months, and I went into that winter break that December feeling like a failure. Why was it that everyone else looking for a relationship or even just new friends seemed to be able to at least get some sort of result for their efforts, but I wasn't? So I began going back onto Bumble, and I also downloaded Tinder, and in desperation I swiped right on nearly everyone I saw. On Bumble, out of the hundreds I was swiping right on, I got matched with 2, neither of whom messaged me. It was honestly pretty discouraging since 90% of the girls I were seeing were white, and just based on the fact that you see basically 0 white girl-Asian guy couples in real life, you know, like, almost none of them will even bother to swipe right the moment they see you're Asian. On Tinder, while I got a few matches after weeks of swiping right, almost none of those turned into getting actual responses when I sent a message. And after I tried doing some research about this, I saw you had to send all these sugar-coated fake-ass messages, or at least I thought so, in order to really get anywhere, and I just hated it. I mean, I tried my hand at doing these fake things I was reading online, but I couldn't keep it up long enough for the other person to be interested enough to want to meet up with me. It really came to annoy me how it seemed like most girls could just sit there and be as picky as they wanted and never have to worry about a shortage of men that want to go on dates with them, but here I was investing so much effort and time and couldn't even get to a single date. With how high my need for connection was, I literally just wanted to be given one single date, one time, to give me hope that I had a chance in all this, but that didn't happen, and it really wore down on me. In addition to that, my need for physical connection had also grown even stronger. I'd never imagined that a sex drive could be as strong as I was feeling it, and it got to the extent that I woke up one night feeling a literal discomfort and pain in my chest from lack of physical touch and the need to feel intimacy, and I wasn't able to fall asleep again since that longing was just so incredibly intense. And due to not feeling the slightest bit of either physical or emotional connection, it was around this time that I had my first thoughts of actually ending my life. The past couple months I would think, oh, I wouldn't care if I suddenly died, but this was the first time the thought of actually carrying that out myself crossed my mind. So this is the state that I came back to Rice in. A more intense sex drive than ever, and a more intense need for emotional connection than ever. I still felt shitty after a couple weeks of the semester, and I just felt so different and isolated from everyone else, and I thought there was something deeper that was wrong with me because of how I'd been feeling. So one day when I got really upset, and I outright messaged my older sister, "Is there something wrong with me?" And this is what she said: "I am 99.99% sure that you have Asperger's." And she wasn't just blindly saying that. She had reasons why she was so sure, but I won't go into that here. Anyway, I looked at that word, Asperger's, and I didn't really know what to think. Well, my sister explained it a little more, and I did some research of my own. So here's a very brief general explanation of it. Asperger's is a developmental disorder that is nowadays considered high-functioning autism. This is different from lower-functioning autism, since people with Asperger's typically have normal cognitive abilities and acquire language skills normally. But people with Asperger's tend to have a few main traits. So 1, trouble reading social cues. In other words, I guess you could say we have trouble reading the atmosphere in social situations and thus have a harder time behaving appropriately. 2, lack of communication skills. In actual conversations, we have trouble figuring out what to say, or rather, how to properly convey your thoughts the way that neurotypical people do. And neurotypical is the way that we describe people not on the autism spectrum. Our body language and our reading of other people's body language might also be slightly off. 3. A tendency to develop deep fixations in very specific topics, which could be something like a video game or statistics for a sport. 4. Cognitive rigidity, as in we tend to be pretty inflexible in our habits and schedules. There's obviously more than just that, but those are 4 of the most basic things. And well, after learning all this, I was actually quite relieved. It was nice to know that there was an actual reason behind all this frustration. I was more than just socially awkward, and my struggles, they made sense. In fact, my entire life suddenly made sense when I considered it in the lens of having Asperger's. It all just fell into place. Why I could never make eye contact with people during conversations. Why I was so anal about my sleep schedule. Why I had all these ridiculous obsessions throughout my life, like video games, movies, and now Japanese in college. I would say having Asperger's is, in a way, kind of like living in a different dimension, at least in a social aspect, than everyone else. Because the way you perceive social interactions and the way you think is completely different. So that often leads to feelings of isolation and loneliness, like there's a barrier between you and the world. But anyway, I would say I was finally able to feel peace for the first time in months upon knowing that there was a deeper cause of why I felt so different and why it was so hard to connect to people. And on top of that, I understood that there was a very solid reason for wanting to continue studying Japanese. It's because, as someone that has so much trouble connecting with others, learning another language is kind of like this extra avenue for me to be able to form connections with a part of the world I would never have been exposed to otherwise. And as someone with Asperger's who has trouble with social cues, well, when you converse in Japanese, the social cues are slightly different. So for example, like, you give a lot more back-channel responses while the other person is talking to you. So it allows me to learn social cues completely from scratch with every other non-native speaker and actually feel like I'm roughly on the same level as everyone else, unlike in English.